Elections are shaping destinies. Wars are redrawing borders. Economies are rising and falling. And global alliances are being tested like never before. But what does it all mean for you?
With a new administration and a new president in the White House trying to put an end to the war.
I didn't know the historical context, what the state of Israel means for them.
Join the fearless Ireti Bakare-Yusuf on Borderlines every Friday at 4 p.m. on Nigeria Info 99.3 as she dissects the biggest global events and their impact on world peace.
Those who are not familiar with Israel or the war itself would not know much about the group breaking the silence.
No spin, no propaganda, just deep insights and fearless conversations on the geopolitics shaping our world.
People who will call and start telling you about the Bible prophecy about America and everything. See, America is not in the Bible. There's some people who, yes, they share the ideology of, yes, we and these people, we are equal, but they can't speak up.
Borderlines on Nigeria Info every Friday at 4 p.m. The world is changing. Don't just watch, understand it. Nigeria Info. Let's talk.
Good afternoon, Lagos, Nigeria, wherever you're listening to us from, Israel, Palestine, Europe, Germany, UK, which is where my next guest, and you can see me smiling, which is where she's based, and she's an absolutely phenomenal journalist. I'm not exaggerating. You may not know her work because if you don't listen to British news, if you don't read Al Jazeera, if you don't read the New York Times, you may not be familiar with her work. Indeed, if you don't read at all, actually, is what I would say. We've wanted to get her here, and it's a big deal that she's here because let me tell you, she was supposed to be here, I think, a couple of months ago, and unfortunately, she lost her mother. So when you do call, I would like you to actually pass on your condolences the way we do in Nigeria. So her name is Rachel. Yes, Rachel Shabi. She's an award-winning journalist who has written for The Guardian, New York Times, Independent, Nation, Al Jazeera, and The Times. In 2011, she was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for Journalism. And her last book, Not the Enemy, Israel's Jews from Arab Lands, won a National Jewish Book Award. Rachel, welcome to, digitally, or should I say remotely, to Lagos, Nigeria. Can you hear me? I can't hear my guest. Is it fixed? Oh, Rachel, are you on mute? Oh, you've been unmuted, I think. Okay, what's going on? Hello.
Hello.
Ah, superb. Rachel, hello, how are you?
Very well. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you after your mum? The passing of your mum. How are you after that?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
But how's everybody doing? I think it was a surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, it was expected, but it always hits hard. She was like the last elder, So, but we're all kind of, trying to get back into things. It's sad.
It is. It's always sad to lose the mum. I know dads are important, but when you lose your mum as a girl, there's something.
There's something, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's your mum.
It's your mum. Yeah. It's mum.
Yeah. It's mum. It's mum. It really, it just catches you. It gets to the core of, something quite foundational about us, isn't it? Your relationship with your mum.
Indeed. Thank you. So your new book, I have gotten it. I did get it. I haven't been able to finish it yet. It's called, everybody, write it down, The Truth About Anti-Semitism. It's informative. It is instructional. I advise you to go and read it, and I'm not promoting because she's here. She doesn't pay me anything. She doesn't have to. It's a frigging good book. I mean, that's just the long and short of it. But here's the thing. One of the things when I read the introduction, because one doesn't almost, people don't always read the introduction of a book. But I guess as a journalist, I make a habit of reading the introduction because it kind of instructs us as to why the author felt the book was important. you mentioned Donald Trump. You mentioned the far right. You mentioned the fact that, this Donald Trump, or you remind us that the Donald Trump that we see today was actually a promoter of Nazism, etc., etc. And one of the things that you said in there was how you, and I won't tell everybody who you were, what your sort of ethnic heritage is. I'll let you do that. How you hadn't even sort of placed yourself in that anti-Semitic, what is it? Why is it? It wasn't your thing. You were just getting on. Rachel, the journalist, the left-wing progressive, writing about British politics, British social politics and society, and indeed writing against, the violent language of, anti-immigration. And then you found yourself thinking about this anti-Semitism. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And thank you also for those kind words about the book and for having me on to talk to you. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. You're absolutely right. Anti-Semitism was not my beat. It wasn't something that I covered. Sure, I read the news about it, just like everyone else, but it wasn't an area that I would describe as my field of expertise. I wrote about, as you say, current affairs, British politics, the toxic conversation that we and other Western countries are having about immigration, anti-racism, progressive movements. I spent 5 years reporting from Israel-Palestine. And then I found myself in the crosshairs, or in the middle of this giant dumpster fire of a conversation around anti-Semitism. And the way that it flared up in British politics, and also as we then saw in American politics, and in, now we have the situation in Australian politics, for example, it's just a train wreck. It's creating more division, more confusion about anti-Semitism. It has been commandeered by the far right, including Donald Trump and others. It's been poorly understood by sections of the progressive left. And what it's produced is more division among progressives who should be reunited in their anti-racism at a time when the racism itself is spiraling. So I wanted to untangle why are we in this mess? What happened? And what are the currents that inform this god-awful situation? So that's what I set out to do in the book.
And you did it very, very well. I mean, I like the fact that you started with, again, something millions of people are not confronted with. And it's something that only those who feel it, who experience it, are confronted with. The color chart. The color chart conundrum. How and you wrote here, I think there's a part, because I scribbled, but I think I'll go to this one. Right, you said, chances are that when people think Jewish, the person they have in mind is of European Jewish origin. German, say, or Polish, Hungarian or Russian. European Jews are the majority globally, but we are too quick to overlook the millions of Jews with Middle Eastern and North African heritage. Black Jews. Can you hear that, Nigeria? Black Jews. Yes. Jews of other ethnic backgrounds. Yes, they exist. One British black Jewish woman, and this got me, tells me that her identity carries with it experience of what she describes as a constant and soul destroying erasure. In this chapter, it's interesting how you bring in, the racism of the Spanish, right? The racism of the Spanish, the transatlantic slavery, the construction of blackness, and then the fact that, hang on a minute, I think you said your friend said to you, Rachel, you're Iraqi. You're Iraqi Jew. You're not white. Are you white? Is it white? Like, it's That's why I said, people, it is such an important book. Richard, talk to us about that. Talk to us about how you're Jew, you're white, you're not white enough, but today you're Jew and you're white. But if you're Jew and left wing, you're not quite white. And if you're Jew, Iraqi, left wing, Mizrahi, it's all a salad. They're thrown all over the place.
Well, I think you put the issue so well, and you signpost some of the themes that have made this so convoluted so well. The chapter on whiteness and the sort of what are Jewish people? It's around this idea that, obviously we progressives are starting, in Western countries are starting more and more to engage with the realities of structural racism, with the legacy of colonialism and slavery that perpetuates to this day in the form of discrimination and structural racism in those countries. When we look at anti-Semitism, it doesn't really fit into that trajectory. Jewish people, by and large, do not have the state, right, discriminating or enacting violence against them. That's not what this is. It's a different kind of racism, which we can go into. And so, it means that someone who looks like me, I'm not going to get chased around by security in stores. I'm not going to have different outcomes in education or housing or employment. I'm not going to be stopped and searched disproportionately by police randomly, stopped at airports. I'm not going to face those sort of multiple biases that, people of color have to navigate the moment they step out of their front door, right? That's not going to happen. But when you look at the history of, racism and anti-Semitism, what I found really instructive for us as progressives was the idea that there's this constant interplay. Racists aren't very original thinkers, so they're constantly cribbing notes from each other over how to be racist. And the origin story is always Christian Europe that invented different kinds of racism against different types of people for different reasons at different times, but always to maintain their own power, always to advance racial capitalism and empire in some shape or form. And so you can see, you mentioned Spain, well, you can see that, at the point where Spain reconquered the southern part of Spain, which was under Islamic rule, it imposed these purity tests on Jewish and then Muslim people, this purity of blood idea of like, what are we going to do with these people who they look white, they've converted to Christianity because we said otherwise we'd kill them. Now they're getting all these white people jobs and they're getting status in society. What are we going to do about that? So they invented this purity of blood categorization that allowed them to filter out people who were not really Christian and not really white. And then you see that concept traveled to the Americas with Christopher Columbus and others who then became, excuse me,
it's okay,
the undergirding for the system that racialized people in order to enslave them and subjugate them to hundreds and hundreds of years of the most grotesque torture and oppression. It was the same idea around purity of blood that allowed the people, the enslavers, to categorize and to invent this category of Black that produced racism. So you can see the interplay, how the thinking behind the idea of racism is jumping from category to category for different purposes, but it's always Christian Europe at the heart. And I found that really instructive because it means, well, how can we fight these racisms in silos? We have to be able to fight them collectively in a morally coherent way.
You wrote, and again, I'm going to read this quote out for my listeners because they're fond of taking over my show when it comes to Q&A. So I want them to understand. You wrote, the same Arthur Balfour, so keen to promise Jews a national home in 1917, had been an enthusiastic campaigner for the 1905 Aliens Act, designed to keep Jewish immigrants out of Britain. By the 1930s, Jews were escaping the Third Reich. Palestine was hardly the destination of choice for most Jews in dire straits. They looked to America or to Britain, but both countries had closed their doors to Jewish arrivals. I keep saying, you just got to read it. You have to read it. In your book, Not the Enemy, you talked about, Jews, Jews from Arab land, and what made you want to tell that story, and how did you begin to speak to the larger systems of power and control in the region?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, because it really gets to the heart of some of the complexities that we're looking at. And, the situation that we're looking at now with, obviously this grotesque genocidal war in Gaza is not complicated. There are different trajectories to how people ended up in that region, Israel-Palestine. So the book about Jews from Arab lands, like, as you say, like my family who came from Iraq and were part of the exodus of Jews to the fledgling state of Israel in the early 50s. I wanted to write about how Israel, which is in the Middle East and has a majority Middle Eastern population, when you combine Jews from Arab and Muslim lands with the Palestinian citizens of Israel, who are some 20% of the population and obviously face discrimination and all kinds of difficulties inside Israel as Palestinians. Put those populations together. The majority population of Israel is Middle Eastern. It's located in the Middle East. And yet the way it talks about itself is, we're the front line of Europe. We're the bastion of European values in the heart of the Middle East. And you're thinking, well, you're not though, are you? So I wanted to explain what that is about. Obviously, there's the colonial element of that, right? For a country to rock up in the middle of the Middle East and say, well, we're European, is a very colonial mindset in and of itself. But I wanted to explain what happened to the Jews from Arab lands who did not experience the centuries of persecution culminating in the horrors of the Holocaust, but with centuries of, violence and fleeing from pogrom to pogrom across Europe. That was not the story for Jews from Arab Muslim lands, who in the same time frame were by and large integrated, thriving politically, religiously, culturally, economically. It wasn't all roses. Obviously there were difficulties. It was bumpy, but certainly compared to the trajectories of Jews in Europe, it was just immeasurably better. And, Zionism, the idea of creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine, could only have come from Europe, because there was no virulent, relentless anti-Semitism to try and find a solution to in the Middle East. So what I thought would be useful, I told the story in Jews from Arab, Not the Enemy, of how Jews from Arab lands were sort of culturally whitewashed and de-Arabized.
Ilan Pape talks about that, doesn't he? He talks about the de-Arabization and how the amount of effort that was put into it. I think indeed, was it Noam Chomsky, or was it the British guy, one of our British Jewish guys, who said he was Iraqi? Avi Shlaim. Thank you. Yes.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, he wrote an excellent book about that recently, Three Worlds. It's well worth reading. One of the first people to speak and write about this was a Iraqi-Israeli intellectual, Ella Shohat, who's also, I highly recommend her in terms of not just her work about Arab Jews, but also about Palestinians and colonialism and racism across the transatlantic in a way. So she was the first to locate this idea of, of course, Palestinians were the primary victims of Zionism since they experienced it as colonial in terms of, dispossession, military occupation, apartheid form of rule, up to and including this genocidal war we're seeing now, because colonialism, as we know, is ongoing. They were the primary victims, but there were also an internal victims of Zionism in a way, and that was the Jews from Arab lands, as Ella Shaw had identified, who were, discriminated against and, cast as backward and inferior. Their culture was denigrated. These rich cultural histories, right, from Iraq and Egypt and Morocco and Tunisia, just not appreciated in a country that had a sort of European superiority complex at that time.
Talk to us about, there is a question that I want to ask you. In fact, I think I'll ask now. It's a good time to ask.
Go on then.
October 7th, where were you and where did you hear about it, and what were your immediate thoughts as an Israeli-born Iraqi British Jew? I think that's the right way around, right? Is that right? Israel, yeah. Iraq, British Jew. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. You were perfect. You were spot on first time. I was in the UK. I could see the story unfolding in real time across social media, across my WhatsApp, across, I know people in the region. And so very early on, I became aware of the situation. And, I know that area around the Gaza Strip very well. A lot of Jews from Arab, there's a lot of Moroccan origin Jewish communities in those areas that border Gaza. And so I spent a lot of time in that region interviewing people for my first book. And so, of course, it was devastating. Of course it was. There are people that I know and care about who lost family members, lost relatives. It's horrific and a war crime. At the same time, and this isn't to minimize the horrors of October 7th, at the same time, those of us who know the region well, who've been following Israel-Palestine for a while, were also filled with a horrifying sense of foreboding, because we knew that the response from Israel, from the Israeli state, from the Israeli government, which is the most right-wing we have ever seen, we knew the response would be horrific. So anyone who had been watching Israel-Palestine for some time could have said, look, this situation, this reality, this ongoing military occupation and apartheid rule, and the siege on Gaza, which has been going since 2005, is not sustainable. Something's going to give. We don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be good. It's going to be really, really bad, right? That was the analysis of, serious people who'd been watching the region for some time. And so when something like this happened, of course, we were filled with a sense of a dread over what would then happen in Gaza.
October 7th is often actually compared or juxtaposed or plastered on the Warsaw Uprising during in Nazi Germany, and how it wasn't the Jewish elites in Nazi Germany who kind of stood up against Hitler and his evil people. It was ordinary people who were living there, and they had the courage, the fearlessness to actually say, we're not going to die silently. We're not going to make it easy for you to kill us. Would you agree with that?
I think that there's immediately after October 7, a lot of Jewish Israelis and a lot of Jews in the diaspora were talking about it in terms of, the worst thing since the Holocaust, and using the language of pogroms. And I think we just need to be really careful about that, because first of all, we could see the Israeli government, again, the most far right, the most extreme, the most expansionist, the most denying of Palestinian rights and freedom and even existence of Palestinians and the right to Palestine, were using that to drum up support for their assault on Gaza. So that's one thing. If you're saying that the perpetrators of the atrocities on October 7, which unequivocally were war crimes, if you're saying that they're like Nazis, then you're saying that the response should be as one would respond to Nazis. So that's a very dangerous, horrific road to go down. The other thing, of course, is that awful though they were, and, you know, there were scenes of Jewish people, you know, hiding to escape being killed or, you know, being burned in their homes. And of course, that's going to be triggering and reminiscent of dark times. And at the same time, Jews in Israel are not the same as Jews without power in, you know, Poland and elsewhere, Germany, who are being persecuted by the state. You know, Jewish people in their own country, with their own government, and, you know, one of the most militarized countries in the world, back to the hilt by the most powerful country in the world, the US, to compare them to Jewish people who were dealing with the horrors of the Nazis is so grotesque a disservice to the memory of those Jewish people who were trying to survive in the 30s and 40s. That I do think, you know, out of respect, if nothing else, we need to avoid making those comparisons.
Right. So, which brings me back to the topic of anti-Semitism. Often, anti-Semitism is a racist trope, ugliness against Jewish people. Yet, Palestinians are also Semites. So why is it not seen as an ugliness and a racist trope against Palestinians? It's something that I, you know, in spite of all my reading, still try to balance or understand.
It's interesting you should ask that. I get asked that a lot when I've been traveling and talking about the book. And it boils down to just a fundamental misconception about the origins of anti-Semitism, in that the term was actually invented by an anti-Semite as a badge of honor, a German, who, you know, was part of the movement of, you know, scientific racism, in inverted commas, which was basically just a way to pretend to be rational while being racist, and inventing all kinds of categorization systems to suggest that your racism is the product of serious thinking as opposed to plain old bigotry. And he invented this term as a positive, as a way of saying, you know, we are the anti-Semites. We are part of the anti-Semite society. He invented it exclusively and specifically to talk about Jewish people. And so the basic origin of that terminology and the way it developed and the way it is used is only to talk about Jewish people. The category of Semite, I grant you, is confusing, because it does, of course, mean, you know, it was a sort of Orientalist term to describe people in that Levant region, primarily Muslims and Jewish people who spoke Semitic languages. But that's not the way it was commandeered in order to categorize anti-Jewish hatred, and that's the way it's used today.
And that's the commandeering that I remember seeing a conversation between you and Mehdi Hassan, where, you know, he's a Muslim, you're a Jew, and you both said, you know, it's almost like we've been used by the other side to kind of fight each other. You know, is that part of that commandeering, that part of, you know, the colonialist divide and rule, or divide and conquer in order to rule?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting question. And I, you know, in answering it, I don't want to get away from agency. I mean, clearly some Israeli leaders and some Jewish communal bodies in the diaspora are part of the rhetoric, a driving part of the rhetoric that is Islamophobic and anti-Muslim and anti-Palestinian. So, you know, we can't get away from that agency. At the same time, I do think there's a case of, you know, panning back to see that wider hand of imperialism in Israel-Palestine. So yes, the element of settler colonialism that was that Palestinians were subjected to that was European in origin. And then the fact that the Jewish people who arrived there from Europe were arriving because they were fleeing persecution in those European countries. And a lot of the West had closed its doors, as you said earlier, at that critical moment. You know, both the UK and the US, and in fact, most other countries on the eve of the Second World War said, no, we can't possibly take Jewish refugees. So absent other alternatives, Jewish people escaping that persecution ended up in Palestine as a product of European anti-Semitism, which was so virulent and rampant that Jewish people in Europe were trying to seek ways of escaping it in a permanent way. And at the same time, you've got the Jews from Arab and Muslim countries, like my family from Iraq, but also, you know, Iraq was then under British mandate, as was Palestine. You have the French in North Africa, in Morocco, in Tunisia. And they played that very familiar divide and rule game where they privileged Jewish people just enough, put them just above everybody else so that they could be the buffer and onto whom attention could be deflected if things went wrong. So that divide and rule colonial playbook was applied by French and British imperial countries with their mandates in the Middle East. And that was part of the unraveling of, you know, those hybrid Arab Jewish identities that then drove that exodus of Jews from Muslim and Arab lands into the new state of Israel. And so all of those trajectories, there's different ways in which we're looking at, again, different people being racialized and treated as racialized minorities in different ways. But we do need to see the European hand.
It's always there. It's always there. It's always there.
Always there.
Always there. Not even so much a hand, is like a dagger. Slash, 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 and keep slashing. But yeah, so let's talk about the peace process. I mean, you've been critical of how some NGOs, you know, international NGOs, have pretty much made an industry out of talking about the peace process and standing for peace and everything. And here we are today. I remember one of the things that happened after October 7th was a particular senior member of the UN resigned. And he resigned. He's an American. I can't remember his name. He resigned. And I remember watching his interview and he said, well, you know, the peace process is something that's at the back of the shelf in the library and it's become a joke. You know, the two-state solution. Alas, here we are talking. All we hear is the two-state solution, the two-state solution. Well, I really would love to say to Keir Starmer, where is that border that creates the two states? So as somebody who, you know, and I'm asking you this now, what's your view of, you know, this kind of feel-good diplomacy that seems to be, you know, the way that some international, Macron, all of them, are now kind of trying to plaster on their morality, their humanity, their conscience?
It's too little, it's too late. I think that we're looking at an epic moral catastrophe. The moral failure of these Western countries that have supported Israel in terms of arms and funding and, you know, constant diplomatic cover and deflecting and obfuscating what's actually been happening in Gaza for the past 22 months, just horrifying atrocities that are making us all lose our minds because they're so grotesque. The fact that Western countries have facilitated and enabled this is to our eternal shame. It's absolutely a failure in leadership, not just in terms of consigning Palestinians in Gaza to this dystopian nightmare without end, but also the fact that they've been prepared to break everything, you know, shatter international norms, violate international law, break the assumption that there is a rule of law. we've seen that it's countries in the global south. You look at South Africa taking Israel, the International Court of Justice, countries in the global south saying, we have to preserve this rule of law. We have to preserve this universalism, this idea of international law that these Western governments are so intent on breaking. And even now, I've heard in the last few weeks, several analysts say, well, the idea of, as you were alluding to, saying, with Macron and Starmer in Britain and Canada as well, saying, well, we're going to recognize Palestine. And the worry is that there's not going to be a Palestine left to recognize, right? Israel, the cabinet yesterday just approved occupying Gaza, which I think was clear all along to anybody who was paying attention. West Bank, occupied West Bank, is just horrific now in terms of settler attacks and what Palestinians are dealing with. And clearly the Israeli government wants to annex that outright. Where is the Palestine on which you're going to hypothetically recognize Palestinian statehood? So again, these things are so inadequate. They're so mealy-mouthed. In the face of a genocide, something characterized as genocide by a growing chorus of international experts, including, Israeli human rights groups like B'Tselem, including Holocaust studies, Israeli Holocaust scholars, a growing chorus saying, yes, this is genocidal. The Western responsibility is to protect those against whom the genocide is being perpetrated. And we're not seeing anything near a response that even comes close to that at the moment. And that's just such a catastrophic failure from all these leaders.
And it's interesting because I do want to ask you about something in your book, but I'll join them both together because, again, we're running out of time. I wish I could keep you for 2 hours. Right. You wrote in page 156. The article was called Building a Political Firewall Against Israel's Delegitimization. And there's a quote here. You quote Sharansky and you said, Israel has been successfully branded by its adversaries as a violent country that violates international law and human rights. He's obviously, Sharansky, trying to kind of create, get people riled up and get them to fight against it. And you went on page 156, you said, because not you, the quote, because Israel's delegitimization is often a modern form of anti-Semitism. I find that interesting, and the reason I ask it with this is you've talked about all the atrocities that's going on. We're seeing babies, we're seeing, just human beings. And I often wonder, just as an aside, why is it that Palestinian lives don't matter unless you see babies? It's weird for me, unless it's women and children. Humans, hello, blood, human, breathing, oxygen. But anyway, that's me getting on my soapbox. So I'd like you to talk to us about the damage that's actually, what we're seeing now, and that the trope, the, two-state solution, the lack of action, the Macrons, the Trumps, the Keir Starmer, the German, the Ursula von, somebody called Ursula von genocide last week. All of the damage that they are by and large doing to Jewish people, not just Israel, and Jewish people, and why delegitimizing Israel is seen as anti-Semitic, whereas delegitimizing or the lack of legitimization of Palestine is not seen like that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I think, you are such a thoughtful question, and it gets to the heart of so many of these contradictions that we're seeing in the way that the media and political conversation is playing out, right? And I guess at the heart of it is you could only have this worldview if you had first dehumanized Palestinians to such an extent that you do not see the idea that every life is a universe. You do not see that applying to Palestinians. And that is we have to factor in a trajectory of anti-Palestinian racism, of Islamophobia. And, that didn't start yesterday. That's been ongoing for decades. What I would say is that, you're absolutely right. When we look at the response just today, right, to the Israeli security cabinet saying, oh yeah, we've approved, we're gonna occupy Gaza, which has always been the dream of the messianic, ultra-nationalist movement that is now in charge of the government in Israel. And Starmer says to Israel, please reconsider. And Ursula von der Leyen says, yeah, can you reconsider? And it's like, are you joking? This is your response. It is so wholly inadequate. Israel does not give a stuff if Western leaders politely ask it to reconsider. The only thing that will make a difference is action, is, sanctions, it's an arms embargo, it's actual, policy changes that will compel Israel to change course, because nothing else will. And for Jewish people, I think that the current conversation that you alluded to so well, that we're having around anti-Semitism and the idea that any criticism of Israel, anybody crying out for the atrocities in Gaza to stop, is now accused of anti-Semitism. Anyone, it's the UN, it's newspapers, it's pop singers, it's the Israeli Haaretz newspaper. They get accused of anti-Semitism, for goodness sake. So what that's done, first of all, the effect on, chilling free speech, right? So first of all, for Palestinians who need to be able to describe in their own words and their own terms what they are experiencing. People, sometimes with families in Gaza, and want to be able to describe that without constantly being shut down. So the chilling of free speech, the fact that people are risking jobs and livelihoods and reputations because of the way of this conflation is taking place. But the other thing it does is that it makes people take anti-Semitism less seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fundamentally an unserious approach to racism. If you wanted to tackle anti-Semitism genuinely, you would not do it like this. And so what we're starting to see is that this conflation is not just serving the Israeli state and pro-expansionist Israel supporters, it's serving authoritarians who use accusations of anti-Semitism as a cudgel, as a wedge, as a way to impose agendas, as a way to attack not just Palestine solidarity, but everything else they don't like as part of their culture war. Wokeism, critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, liberal universities. They're going for all of it, and they're using anti-Semitism as the wedge. So I think we need to understand that it is a cover, that these people who claim to be defending Jews are not serious, that this fight against anti-Semitism is not real. We need to take that fight into our own hands and build solidarity around a genuine anti-racist movement that leaves no one behind.
Indeed. You can call now. I've got 10 minutes or so. 020127709993. The female only line is 0201465790, or use the WhatsApp on 080959758005. Right, so let's talk about our jobs, our industry, journalism. Who's owning the friggin' newsroom right now? Because what to say? What could we have said? Which evidence would we have had if not for Palestinian Gazan journalists on the ground? Literally, I want to go and report from Gaza. Israel was happy to take me to Tel Aviv after the 7th of October. And I went. They invited me and I went. And I saw the atrocities myself. Sorry. But I want to go to Gaza. I want to go to Palestine. I want to go and report there. My listeners, our followers, they're interested. But I can't go. We have to be thankful we are beholden to those Palestinian journalists on the ground. Who's holding the newsroom and the narrative? And what have we, journalism, when I say we, I mean our industry, our skill, our profession, where has it failed? Where does it fail humanity? Because we used to think we were human.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right about the Palestinian journalists in Gaza who are risking their lives and sometimes have been killed. So many Palestinian journalists have lost their lives, have been killed by Israel while trying to do their job and tell the world what's actually happening. And I have to say as well that I dread to think what we're going to see when Western journalists are finally allowed into Gaza. I dread to think, because what we're seeing is bad enough. And so, I can't even imagine what is going to unfold once we're allowed in. But there's been this horrendous catch-all mechanism whereby Israel, they've said to you and they've said to other Western journalists, no, you can't go to Gaza. It's not safe. You're not allowed in. And they've also at the same time said, oh, and you can't trust Palestinian journalists in Gaza because either one, they're all Hamas, or two, they're controlled by Hamas. And it's like, well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, you non-Palestinian journalists can't go in, but also you can't trust the Palestinian journalists. That's kind of having your cake and eating it. And so that mechanism, I just feel like there's been a failure. Lots of journalists have tried to stand up for that.
Let me just interrupt you a second to answer this call, because I think there's something wrong with our lines. Hello? It's not working? Okay, there's something wrong with our lines, unfortunately. Go ahead. But keep trying. It might start working before we're done. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Rachel. I had to interrupt you there.
Oh, no, of course. We want to hear from listeners.
Yeah.
There have been journalists that have tried to get access and have called this out, but by and large, we haven't had large international media outlets say, all right, well, if you're not going to let us into Gaza, which by the way is our risk assessment, that's on us to make that calculation.
Okay,
that's not.
Let me just trying again. Hello. Turn off your radio, please, quickly. Good evening. You have 30 seconds. Go ahead. What's your name?
This is Badamasi from Surulere.
Okay, go ahead.
I've enjoyed your guest so much, and the problem about Semitism, where the Semites are discriminated all over Europe and everywhere. But the problem I'm having is that why is Palestinians not regarded as Semites?
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Semites, they are the children of Shem, and all over the place we know Arabs. If you look at them very well.
Yeah, Pastor, I need to hurry you up. Yeah, we don't have. Yeah.
Why is that sharp discrimination?
Okay. All right.
Why has it worked?
Thank you. Well, I think you've answered it, but you might want to expand on it. He's asking about. He actually said, Palestinians and Jews look alike. Why are they not, seen as Semites? But I think you've answered it, and he thinks that what's going on with that racism. But feel free. I've got how long left? 3 minutes? 2.5 minutes left. So I still want to stick in one question, but I'll give you 30 seconds to speak to Pastor Badamasi. I do think there's something wrong with our lines today.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a great question. One of the things that some people have said, some analysts and academics, is, as a response to European anti-Semitism, the European Jews who pioneered anti-Semitism took that response and ended up projecting another racism onto Palestinians instead of, there could have been, perhaps they internalized European superiority. Perhaps they wanted to finally be European after being told that they were other, that they were not European. But you can imagine they could have just said, well, actually, fine, we're Semites. We're going to go and live in Palestine with the other Semites, since you think we're not good enough here. They did. There's a a parallel universe in which there wasn't another racism that was projected onto another Semitic people. So I think that's a really good question.
Okay, they're trying to actually throw me off, but I'm gonna end with something. Yeah, oh, you'll be surprised. This is Nigeria, I tell you. You know, you Western journalists tend to think that they haven't let you into Gaza. They don't even come to Africa. Like literally, Borderlines has been covering this forever. And if I want to go in, they don't even remember that there's this woman who's been covering this for a long time. So please, if they invite you, remember your girl, Rachel. Remember Ireti's in Nigeria. She's ready to go.
Yeah.
So, as and when they let us in. But yeah, so, let's close on this. I got 30 seconds. What sentence would be an anti-Semitic sentence in 10 seconds? Give us one, because I need people to know this.
Jews control the media. Jews control the world. Great replacement theory, which is rampant across the far right. Jews are plotting to overwhelm white majority countries by overwhelming them with mainly Muslim migrants. Classic anti-Semitic conspiracy of the far right.
Rachel Shabi is a journalist. She's now a friend of the house.
You are listening
Thank
to
you.
your
They've
number
cut
one
me
station
off.
for talk.
99.3 Nigeria Info.
99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk. 99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.